Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fire 5 at Phoenix. I think this is number 9 of season 2. So flying through these. So the premise of this podcast is that I am joined by a guest, different guest each time, different topic each time. And the guest brings with them 5 questions. 5 questions on the topic, but 5 questions that I haven't seen. So that's what makes this a little bit different. And we are recording this live. So people may well be tuning in live, or you might be listening back on your favourite podcast channel. But hopefully over the next 45 minutes or so, you will learn something from the conversation. But if you are watching us live, feel free to join the conversation, join us in the comments, and we will try and keep an eye on those and pick those up as they come through. So let me introduce my guest today. My guest is Heidi Chapman-Mercer from Ripples Wellbeing. Heidi's going to introduce herself in just a moment, and then we will get into the questions on today's topic, which is goal setting, which is perfect for this time of year as we're recording this in the first week of January. So Heidi, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, and welcome for having me along. It's brilliant. This is my first New Year resolution, maybe. It's my first live stream, so there we go. Thank you.
Fantastic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I did put some of your bio into the intro for people to read through, but tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're about, what you do.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll start with personally first, and then career and what I do now. So I live in Portishead. I am a mother of twin boys who are wonderful, but a little bit crazy, as all 7-year-olds are. I was born in Devon, moved to Bristol. I went to university in Hertfordshire and loved it, and went back to Devon. Loved being away from Devon, very much wanted to get away, but then really wanted to go home at a point, and then met my now wife and came to Bristol and really fell in love with it and have never gone back since. Well, I did obviously to visit, but and then found myself in Portishead, which I don't know why it feels like you're in the city but a little bit out of the city, so a little bit of a cross section. But so I have quite a corporate background, so I worked for a long time in retail. Long time, from working within a shop to key account manager to wholesale, and I'd like to say that I had a master plan, but everything in my career or my working life really has come about quite organically. I wanted to study medicine, and I had quite a trauma in my life, so I didn't go to university or didn't get the grades to study medicine, so ended up studying psychology, which I studied at A-level and had an interest, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I think from that point onwards, I adopted a philosophy of things just happening. So that was how I started working in retail at university, and then carried it on, worked within charity retail, area management, things like that. And then met my now wife and decided to move to Bristol, so started looking for a job, and at the time White Stuff was looking for a maternity cover, so again quite organically, and then started working for there. But alongside that, I've played rugby since I should say not now, but I was playing rugby. I played rugby from age 15, so joined what is now Bristol Vales Women, but at the time we were Bristol, well actually it was Clifton Ladies then, and then it became Bristol Rugby, and started volunteering within the committee. I really enjoyed it, but had a spark, as we all do, with that work-life balance, and said, well, hang on a minute, I'm volunteering 40, 45, 50 hours a week for the rugby club, whilst also being a wholesale national manager, and was like, this is not okay. So I put a business proposal forward to Bristol Rugby and said, I think actually you need to pay me to do what I do, actually. And at the time, Steve Gorvette was the CEO of Bristol Rugby. And he got me in and said, okay, let's have a look at this. And this was when the Bristol sport was in its very infancy. And I'm really proud to say that I was the first person to get paid to work in women's rugby in the UK. So the proposal went through, and I left my job in retail. As I said, everything happens organically, and then started working full time for what was very first, right from the beginning, was Bristol Bears Rugby. And loved it. And I think my philosophy in life is to try and make a difference to the world. And I think to try and make a difference to the world from when you come into the world to when you leave the world. And it doesn't have to be anything drastic, even if it's your little community, it doesn't have to be anything. And to have played a small part in where women's rugby and that journey that kind of came on, and it was very much that from when the women's professional game started coming out and through that. So all of that happened. And then we had a player who was at the club who was called Jen, and was incredible and wonderful, very different to all of us. And I could talk about Jen a lot, but Jen had mental health problems and was very open about her mental health problems. And initially, we all didn't know what to do with her, if I'm really honest. We were like, oh, I don't know about this. And she would genuinely say, how are you? And she would say, actually, I'm really not great. I've had an awful day. This happened, that happened. And we would all go, oh, you meant to say, no, you're fine and everything's okay. And she really embraced, the team went from being a group of people to a family. And she was the huge catalyst for that. And really this journey into a team and a club that was really open about mental health and just, I can't describe it. And Jen went off to university, which was she studied really, really hard, went off to university, which was one of our ambitions, and, would come back and visit and things like that. But Jen's mental health journey was a real challenge for her, and she took her life by suicide. And this was when I was in charge of the club and got all the players in and said, let's talk about this. Let's do what Jen would do. Come in, let's talk about it. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What does this make you worry about? And all of a sudden I was stood in this room and it all came flooding out, as you can expect. But the biggest thing that I heard was people saying, well, actually, I have anxiety. I suffer with depression. I have rituals that I need to do on game day that if I don't do, I get really worried about. And I came out of it saying, well, hang on a minute. I think there's the grief part and the support part, which we have to do. But actually, there's this other thing that, we're looking after players physically, in the gym, medically, physio, all those types of stuff. But actually, what are we doing for the mental health perspective? And so I contacted James, who I knew was requalifying to be a counsellor, and said, I've got this funny idea. What do you think about doing some mental health support for the players? And I didn't know what it would look like. Really thought James could come in and run some workshops with players. And it just organically grew into this. It went on for a long period of time, went on for 6 years, helped a huge variety of players, from players within the Centre of Excellence right up to full international players. And James volunteered his time for that while he was qualifying, and then when he was qualified. And we used to run workshops for the players, but we also ran confidential one-to-one counselling sessions. And we went out in our community programs, so Western College, SGS College, and ran mental health workshops and things within those. And then James and I always said, wouldn't it be really great to do this? Wouldn't it be really great to do it? And at the rugby club, the program was called Ripples, and that was because Jen's dog was called Ripple, and really it was because of her, and it made sense that it was called that. But also, as you and I know, your mental health ripples out into all aspects of your life, and it really made sense. But it was called Ripples, and that's what it was called in its at the rugby club. And James and I, like I said, were always like, what could we do with this? What if? And James was now qualified at counselling, and things were progressing. And he said, actually, James and I work really, really well together. So James is the co-owner, co-founder. We like calling ourselves executive directors. We are a duo, but where I am a procrastinator, which I'll come on to with my goal setting. Whereas James reminds me of my brother, which is a wonderful thing. But James and my brother will go, oh, I want to do this. And before they've almost finished the sentence, they've got a plan and the energy, and they just go and do it. And we work really well, because sometimes that gets you going, but also then sometimes you maybe don't think about all the steps in between. Whereas I like to plan, I like to kind of organize, and then procrastinate and don't get there. As another point. So James and I work really, really well. And James just said, I'm qualified now. Actually, that dream that we had, I think we should just do it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh no, I don't know, I'm not sure. And James said, well, I'm going to do it. And, you know, at the time I was still working for Bristol Bears, we were living through COVID and lockdown and all those wonderful things that we lived through. And I wasn't quite ready. And I think James was, and I said, this is definitely what I want to do, but can I do it? And I think there's this point of courage inside you to say, am I really going to do this? Am I going to start from zero? Am I going to say, this is what I care about? This is my passion. I want to change the world. I want to reduce stigma. I want to make mental health part of everyday conversations with whoever I can. But can I do it? Am I ready? Am I the one who can do it? And we started up the business, like I said, with James. And if I'm really honest, so Nick Elston invited James and I to come along to his very first in-person post-COVID and the world that we lived in, one of his workshops, one of his speaking workshops. And I don't know what I went in with, and I wasn't really sure, and came away and thinking, oh, I think we can do this. I actually think we've got something, and I think this is something that we can really do. And I finished and I had been, although I am a procrastinator, I had been finishing my qualification. So I'd become an AET trainer, which is an adult education trainer. I had qualified to be a mental health first aider, and all of this was going on in the background, but I wasn't ready to take the leap. And then I went along to Nick's workshop and said, actually, I think I am ready. I think I am. And to nigh on the week, I would say it's the week. So a year ago this week, we did our very first mental health first aid course. So that's how we ended up. That's how James and I now exist. And alongside Ripples, I also work for Penny Bron. So I am a wellbeing coordinator for them. So I help organise all their wellbeing services, which work amazingly well with Ripples. And so we offer mental health first aid, mental health awareness workshops, managers, supervisors, training. What else do we do? We do all sorts. 2 days, 1 days. We run seminars. We work with universities. We work with businesses, and we do keynote speaking, event speaking, and it's all just organically grown, really. And it's a really, like I say, that my overall ambition in life is to try and leave the world a little bit better place. And I really think that we're doing that, even if it's one person at a time. So that's me. And that's
a great story. And I'm so glad that you shared so much. I mean, I always leave the intros as very open, because some people are more comfortable sharing more about themselves and their journey than others. So I always leave it really open. But I think yours is such a fantastic story. And I suspect there are probably lots of people that will listen that will be in that similar place with procrastination and kind of waiting for perfect to start and waiting to feel a certain way before stepping into something that is really important to them. So I think even just hearing your story is going to be helpful in itself to some people, because this is where you are now and hasn't always been this way, and yet it's all working out, even though there might not be a big plan in place, but that organic development and evolution of you and Ripples as well is I mean, it's just a great story, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think some days I'd quite like a plan. I like a good plan. And I would like a plan. And I think, but then over, with age and with how life, the other things that life throws at you in your personal journey and work journey and relationships and family life, I think you learn goal setting is really, really important and is essential to have. But over the years, I've learned to become a little bit more flexible with my goal setting. And I think I've learned, but then I think now from a personal perspective, I've almost come the other way, where I used to be very hard driven, very goal driven, came about and it would be stepped until it was achieved. And then I learned to become more flexible with it, which I think was a really great approach. Whereas now, I've become so far that I have goals, but it's the steps in between that to create that. And as I said, I'm a procrastinator, so that lends itself very well.
I think picking up on what you were saying about the difference between yours and James's approaches, and I know that's definitely something that I have had to learn to do, because I'm definitely a jump in with both feet and then work it out once you're in it. That's the whole hesitancy of waiting. That's where the nervousness and overwhelm kicks in for me. So I am definitely somebody who would rather just jump in with 2 feet and then work it out as I go along. But I know that I have to have, very fortunate to have accountability partners that help me to slow that process down, because they're like, well, wait a minute, what else do you need to think about? And I've had to learn to do that, and now I have to force myself to do that, to make sure that I have thought through all of the what ifs and not kind of avoided them in that kind of way of just trying to jump in and get started. So it's always good. I think it's good to work with different people that have different approaches, and there's always lots to learn from that, isn't there? I am aware, as we're talking this through, I might be jumping ahead perhaps on some of your questions. So you've got 5 questions today on the topic of goal setting. So I haven't seen this. I don't have any idea of what Heidi's going to ask, but I'm looking forward to the conversation that will follow. So should we get started?
Yeah. So the first question I have is very open-ended.
Okay.
And I think I was talking to Toya, my wife, last night, and I was saying, I've got these questions, and I some of them, which I'll come on to later, were my first ones to write down. And I was saying to her, what would you ask? What would you ask a life coach if you could ask anyone and you wanted a conversation about goal setting? It instilled a very interesting conversation between the two of us, which was about, where do you even start? And kind of why, not kind of why we need them, but when someone says, I want to have, a goal, and you might say, I want to climb Everest, maybe. I don't want to climb Everest. Let's say someone does. I think identifying the goal sometimes can be easier. But my question was, where do you even start? So if you've got your goal and you know what the goal is, but you don't even know how to start in terms of setting how to get to that goal, how do you even start?
Well, sometimes the conversations I have with people is they don't even know what the goal is. So that's, sometimes it's even that, where do I start, even like, what is it that I want? That's so often is part of the conversation of, I tend to work with people who they know where they are, they know where they want to get to, but they haven't been able to make it happen on their own, or they know that where they are is not where they want to be, but they don't know what they want instead. They just know they don't want to stay as they are. So sometimes that conversation that I have with people is even that step before that of, okay, well, I really genuinely don't know where to start. I do it a couple of ways, actually. I think, so you talked about legacy, how you want to show up in the world, how you want to make your mark in the world. Sometimes I have that conversation with people, okay, right, let's roll it right through to the very end. What do you want to tell people that, what do you want to tell people that you've achieved? What do you want to talk about? How do you want people to talk about you? What's really important to you? Sometimes that's helpful for people, and sometimes you get that blank face of, I don't know what I want. It's quite hard for some people to picture that. Yesterday I did a workshop with the Wheel of Life, and I think that can be a really helpful tool as well, because it's very much a present, what next kind of exercise. So
yesterday, you do your you have the kind of I've seen it from kind of how do I feel in my community and my family and finances and work and relationships? Is that the Wheel of Life? And then you grade it in, don't you?
Yeah, so it's got 8 spokes. In general, most of the Wheel of Lives have the same 8 topics, but you can relabel those topics, because dependent on your own life, you might have different areas that are of more interest to you. So essentially the way that it works is that you have a wheel, each spoke represents a different area of life, and you rate each of those areas in terms of happiness and fulfillment, from low in the middle to high on the outside. So you get a very visual diagram of what is good in life and what maybe isn't so good. And, you know, certainly last night in the workshop, I was saying to people that, you know, you might not be aiming, you know, if you were to number them sort of 0 to 10, you might not be aiming for 10. Actually, you might be quite happy with a 5 out of 10 in some areas. Maybe some areas, say, for example, money isn't so important to you, and actually 5 and what good looks like, you're not aiming for a 10 out of 10, you're just aiming for 5. So I think the Wheel of Life is a great way to ask different questions about where are you now and what is it that you want, and what's the difference between, you know, if you're a 2 out of 10 now and you're trying to get to at least an 8 out of 10, what needs to be different in your life for it to feel more like an 8 out of 10 than a 2 out of 10. So I think that then starts to, you know, those kind of questions start to help people to shape what they want to be different. What do they want instead? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And then when you've got your starting point and your kind of aim point, I was going to say the end point, but it's not always the end. It's maybe just the next milestone. Okay, what sits between where you are now and what's next, and how does that look at those different touch points? And then you can start to look at what do you need to do differently to move yourself forward. Different things work for different people. I mean, some people are really visual and some people not so much. But the questions themselves can help people to think things through. So I know a lot of coaches do the Wheel of Life as an initial exercise with clients. I don't do it as a matter of course. This was, you know, it was a workshop that I ran last night because it's the beginning of a year. It's good, you know, for people who don't know what they want from this year. It's a great way to be able to kind of take that time to reflect. So I think it is really just, where are you now? What's good? What do you want more of? Okay, and where are you now? What's not working? What do you want instead? What do you want to be different? Okay, what does that look like? What does that feel like? Okay, and then we can start to work out. We've got the A, we've got the B. What are those steps in between? Because that's then starts to put things into place. It can be really overwhelming, I think, for some people. So I think just trying to break it down to as a kind of the smallest steps as possible. And the thing with the Wheel of Life is that it gives you a very visual representation of what in life is good and what in life is not as good. But I think one of the things that I mentioned to the group yesterday was that you might have 2 or 3 that are a lower score. So look at the area that if you were to make changes in that area, it would have that ripple effect across different areas of your life. So as an example, you know, you've got work in there. If you were to improve things in your working life, would that have the ripple effect into your home life? Perhaps it would, you know, improve your stress levels, maybe your mental health, your physical health, your relationship. You know, it might have that ripple effect over it. So it's not always about picking the lowest score area. Sometimes it's about picking the lower one that if you were to work on that and focus your energy into that area, it would have that ripple effect across all of the different parts of the wheel. So that's kind of how I do it. But like I said, it's kind of not a one step, you know, it's not a one size fits all process. So I mean, in your conversation with Toya last night, did you come up with answers to that, or was it more just coming up with the question?
I think it was, I had some questions that I definitely wanted to ask, and I'd kind of written those down, and I was saying, well, what about, like, what would you do about this? And Toya was saying, well, like, when I think of goal setting, for me, I think, well, where do you even start with it? You know, how do you even, you know, I think anybody who is a parent or a guardian to a child or a young adult, your life, you know, and it led to a conversation around, you know, your life revolves around them and their goals and their milestones, and making sure that they are healthy and looked after and in all aspects of their life. And, you know, you can their goals inadvertently become your goals almost. And then, we were having quite an interesting conversation to say, I wonder if parents find it easier to set goals or not set goals, because your life as a parent becomes very much about them, isn't it? And it led on to just some really interesting conversations where we were saying, I don't think before children I would have said I was a selfish person at all, but when you have children or you become a guardian or of a child or young adult, or you care for someone, you have to become selfless, and sometimes then your own kind of goal setting and things sometimes loses sight because it's what goals they have, and so it was a really interesting conversation which actually lended itself to that, which was quite interesting.
And I think it's awareness of what your priorities are as well. And I think that with parenting or other responsibilities, your priorities shift, and what might have been important to you before your situation changed will be different to now. But I think it's the awareness of what your priority is. Where it's great to have goals. It's great to have your personal goals as well. But I think also just recognizing that actually, even when we work on ourselves, there's quite often that secondary benefit to the people around us. So I think sometimes it's that it feels, that it feels perhaps more selfish because we're doing something for ourselves. But when we look at take that step back and look at the bigger picture, actually, who else benefits from me working on this goal? Because ultimately, if you're working on something that increases your own happiness and fulfillment, it makes you a better person to be around, and therefore other people then benefit. But it's not always the case. But I think it's recognizing what your priorities are, because certainly something we talked about last night is, when you set your goals, you've got a different emotional investment into how emotionally invested are you into achieving it, but also you need to be really realistic about how much mental and physical energy is going to be needed to put into this. And if you don't have that in the pot, then if you start to create a plan that requires more energy than is in the pot, it just adds to that stress and overwhelm feelings. So it's really important to be aware of your priorities, but also be aware of how much time and energy you've got to invest in this, because you might need to just stretch those timelines a little bit longer and adjust to the time that you've got. So I think they're really important questions. It's an important conversation to have, and absolutely to have the conversation with your partner or the people who you share your time with, because they might not be emotionally invested in the goal that you're working on, but you need them to a point to be emotionally invested in supporting you to do that. Because that's that partnership dynamic, isn't it? So
very much. And then we were saying, why is goal setting so important? And it then led on to kind of that question, which again is my next question for you, was kind of, why is goal setting so important? And, why I know that for me, it gives me focus and it is a driver. I think if you have a very clear set goal, even if, as you say, you can become flexible around the timeline of achieving said goal, I think it makes you, if you have those goals, I have a friend who is very, very similar to my brother and very similar to James, and has a vision board and is very clear, has a vision board, very clear about it. And what she will do is she'll pull it out and she'll say, right, I know this is what I want. And, is very good at saying, coming back to her decisions in the lead up to say, if that's my goal, should I be doing what I'm doing now? Am I doing that?
Yeah.
And, she's very good at it and very goal driven. But I think it then led on to a conversation about why goal setting is so important. It is important. Why is it important?
I think it is. And I think the level of importance is different for different people, but I think in general it is. I mean, when you look at your sort of fundamental human psychological needs, our own self-development is part of that. So we have that inherent psychology in wanting to develop, wanting to evolve, wanting to change. So I think goal setting plays a big part in that, in seeing our own growth and being able to see how we're growing and how we're evolving. And I think the other thing that came to mind when you were talking about that, and I think especially when people are talking about their own mental health, having things to work towards, having things to look forward to, is a big part of a good, healthy mental health. You know, it's having those things to focus on. And I think all of those keywords, if you like, are what I would say are key ingredients to a good level of mental health, mental well-being. So I think that all contributes to it as well, in having things to look forward to, having something to focus on, having something that is for you, I think is really important. I think we all wear lots of different hats, and having something that is purely for us is a positive thing. And I think that all plays into it as well. And I know hope is the word that keeps popping into my mind. And I think that's partly because we were talking about mental illness and the challenges around people who are really struggling with their mental health, with mental illness, and hope plays a big part of that. So somebody having hope would be such a key element into something that helps them keep going and keep working towards that hope that things might be different. And I think goals and little mini goals can play a big part in that. And I think goals is one of those words, isn't it, that you could use in different ways. But I think even, when people are really struggling with mental illness, having little mini goals that help them get through that day, or help them get through the low mood or the dark cloud of a difficult day, setting little tasks to achieve or things that they can do that give them that sign and give them that encouragement that things are getting better, is a significant part of it. And that's goal setting on a kind of very micro level, isn't it? But I think that's the thing, is it taps into that psychology, it taps into that mentality that as humans we need that growth, we need that focus and things to push forward. And so sometimes it's significance, it's contribution, it's variety, it's certainty, it's all of those things that it taps into. But it is really important for us as human beings. It's just how we use that, how we utilize that, and how we make it work for us will be different for each individual. But I think ultimately its core is very similar for all of us.
Yeah, and I think, when you are in a poor mental health place, or you're having a mental health challenge, I think goals can seem something that happens to other people, actually. And sometimes when you're in a really poor mental space, you can hear people talking about goals and you almost roll your eyes and you just think, oh, that is not me, and I can't be around you because you're so driven, and I literally can, today I struggle some days to even get dressed, actually. And I think you're right in that sense that, we use the word goals, but I think as a society, we think that a goal means a 6-bedroom house or a sports car or an X salary or X role in my career. But actually, fundamentally, goals break down into, as you were saying, daily. So what can I do on a daily basis? Can I make a positive contribution to my world and the people who I care about? And actually, goals can be, actually, as a family, we sit down on the 1st of January every year. And we started it in lockdown, actually. And we sit down and we say, what's our word for the year? What's our word going to be this year? What's our family motto for the year? So our motto this year is solutions, not problems. And so it's very much, actually, when something doesn't happen, it's okay, well, that hasn't gone right. So how can we try and work out a solution? And we sit down as a family and we decide something that we want to learn. So one of my children, I don't know where it's come from, wants to learn table tennis. I don't know. And they want me to knit them a blanket. So that's my contribution, but I think it's really enjoyable to sit down as a unit. And if you have a unit, it's become, we've done it 3 years now. And when it was coming to January the 1st, my children were like, oh, we sit down to do what we're doing this year. And I was like, yeah, but it isn't. I think what we what we have evolved this into is it isn't just a tick sheet of am I doing this? Am I doing this? Am I doing this? We have a kindness. What are we going to do this year to be kind?
Yeah.
And what are we going? How are we going to do that? And how can we be kind to other people as well as ourselves? And I think goals, I think, come down to, as you were saying, like, your mental health and your mental well-being comes into it, your physical health.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we all have a tendency to think those goals have to be those, high on the pedestal things, but actually sometimes it can be just, it can be really small things on a daily basis. And I don't know, have you ever heard of you probably have heard of them, of Action for Happiness?
Yes, it's a great website, and a great the stuff they put out on social media is great. But is it January's is it happiness this month? The theme is.
Yeah, so they are, and you've obviously heard of them, but they're based on the teachings of the Dalai Lama, and it's about the things that you can introduce in your life that research and the teaching of the Dalai Lama have led them to this movement that creates a happier life. And what you were talking about earlier on just reminded me of that, in the sense that, giving things, and goals can be, and I think you were saying, goals ultimately have to be about yourself, but also sometimes if you're in a poor mental space, thinking about yourself, sometimes you can't do it. So actually thinking, one of the things that classes, if you're mentally ill from a diagnostic perspective, one of the criteria is, are you contributing to the community that you are part of? Now, your community can be your family, can be your wider, the road where you live in, it can be friends, it can be family. And sometimes I find, when we're doing mental health awareness conversations and workshops and speaking events, I quite often say to people, sometimes if it's really hard to bring it to yourself, maybe sometimes it's really good to think, actually, how can I contribute to everybody else? And actually all of a sudden, by taking it off yourself, sometimes then you find you can come back to yourself clearer, and you can say, actually, I now know what I need to do, actually, and really able to work forward with that. But
the significance and contribution, I think, is really important. And I think we all know it's much easier to be kind to other people than it is to be kind to ourselves. And so sometimes it's that outward focus comes first, and we practice that, and then it's easier to then transfer that to our own selves. But really, really important.
So what factors, I suppose this is a two-pronged question, I suppose. So so it was kind of what factors can help or aid the achievement of goals and or stand in the way? Ooh. Big question, sorry.
No, it's a great question. I think it is having that plan in place, isn't it? But I think also that sometimes you need to have a plan in place, but you need to have that flexibility within that plan as well. And certainly, last night I said to the group, whatever you have just written down as whatever it is that you've just decided you want to achieve, now reduce that so it's 80% of what you just decided, because life throws curveballs at us all the time. It's one thing that we can expect, is the unexpected is going to happen. So we have to have that flexibility within the plan. The process, the system that we follow for getting from where we are now to where we want to get to is really important. But having it flexible enough is, I think sometimes it's that one of my clients calls it, her stickability is sometimes that what is a very positive attribute sometimes becomes a negative because that flexibility isn't there. So I think, planning to 80% rather than planning to 100% is really helpful, because think about your worst day, on the day where work is really busy, one of your children is homesick from school, the other one is a little bit grumpy and wants a little bit more attention, and your wife's late home from work. On that day where all of the things that could possibly go wrong, how much energy and capacity do you have to show up for your goals? Because if you're planning for this much and on that day you've got this much, you're more likely to say, oh, well, I can't do anything today, so I won't do anything at all. But if you always plan that you can still do this much and you still do this much every day, then there'll be some days where you've got a little bit more capacity and you can do a little bit more. So it means you get ahead of the game. So I think most people that I talk to, that's the challenge, in helping them to find something that's sustainable, and something that is sustainable and something that they can be consistent with, because a plan is great, but the plan needs to be both sustainable and it needs to be something that you get excited about, that you want to be consistent with. You want to show up to that every day, rather than that whole kind of deep breath, eyeball roll of, oh God, got everything else, but now I've still got this to do.
Yeah. And I always talk about, and when we talk about in mental health first aid courses, we talk about, what can you do in your workplace? So specific for workplace, what's your idea? What can you do? And I talk to people about their own mental well-being, and obviously specifically within a workplace. And I say to them that, from a research perspective, actually, and if you want to go on evidence and what research is it, then actually, I call them low-hanging fruit, but there's lots of other expressions. But, actually small changes that are sustainable have a bigger long-term effect. So as an example, I drink a lot of tea. So I went on a workshop and we did a caffeine calculator, and I was like horrified at this thing. So I bought decaf tea bags, and I started only having decaf tea from like 4 o'clock onwards. Now, 8 months down the line, I don't drink any caffeinated tea at all. But I looked at that and I remember thinking, I was horrified. But I didn't think it would have a huge impact on my life, actually. But it was sustainable because it was very achievable. It was, I have to buy decaf tea bags, and I have to just have them in the house, have them accessible, and eventually don't buy anything otherwise. And I have to get on with it. But I do quite often talk to people about low-hanging fruit or changes that are small enough to be sustainable, and ultimately all those then little things add together, don't they? The 4 or 5 small things add together to a medium change, and then you do 4 or 5 more, and that medium change becomes bigger. And lots of research shows actually the huge great I don't know whether I still think there's a societal thing around it, which is whole other conversation about this January new me, but we all do it. We all like to set goals. We all like to think about the year ahead. What would we like our year to look like? But actually it's those small little things that actually then really do add up to become, and that research has showed that actually, things like the new year, new me, where everyone joins the gym, I'm going to use that as an expression, goes to the gym 10 times a week, but come March, that really big change, like you were saying, that 100%, rather than thinking what's sustainable in my day, 3 months, 2 months down the line, they're going, well, hang on a minute, I haven't seen my friends for 3 months, I haven't done this for 3 months, I haven't seen my parents, and actually, hang on a minute, this isn't sustainable. I'm out. Actually, whereas actually, if they started the year and said, actually, my goal is I want to be fitter and I want to go to the gym once a week, that's achievable. And actually, to be fair, what I found, and when I speak to people, particularly from mental health goals, you will find that you will achieve more than the one. So actually, sometimes you'll say, I want to go to the gym once. We use that example. But actually, majoritively, you'll probably end up going to the gym and a walk in a week or something else. So actually, you end up achieving more of it than less of it. And that sometimes works better.
I think you can have both. You can set the really big, exciting, scary goals, but then plan to get there with the small, incremental, sustainable, consistent daily activities. And I think that for me is the difference. And I think the smaller that you set it, the easier it is to achieve. And I think for me, it's that difference between the discipline and then the motivation. So certainly the questions that I ask with people that I work with is it small enough for you to be consistent, and is it easy to be disciplined with what you've set? Can you create that discipline to show up with and follow that plan? Because the more you can stay disciplined with the plan that you've made, the more you'll start to see results. And the more results you start to see, the more motivated you will be to keep going. And it's that keep on going, that stickability and that consistency is what's going to bring you those results. So kind of all goes into that melting pot, doesn't it? But it goes back to your first question of, well, where do you start? Will you start with knowing where you want to get to, then you create the plan, but you create a plan that's easy enough for you to be disciplined and consistent with, that's sustainable, because then you'll start to see the results. The results will what motivate you, and that's what's going to keep that momentum going for you to get to the end goal. But there's lots in there, isn't there? There's lots that goes into the melting pot to help you.
Yeah. Lots of parts, isn't there? So I think I lent itself to, at the very beginning when I was talking about it, and I was talking about the differences between James and I, and my brother and me, and a very good friend of mine. And I said that I'm a definite procrastinator. So I definitely have overwhelm and anxiety and things like that. And I, even sometimes when I know what I want to achieve, and I know I can visualize it, I can picture it in my head, I can picture what I'll feel like, what impact it'll have on the rest of my life. And even sometimes I might break it down into the steps, but I still procrastinate about doing it. And I suppose my question I put was, what if you're a procrastinator? What happens then?
So and I think the question that I quite often ask when we're talking about procrastination is like, what's the fear? What are you worried about? What is the thing that's like you and sometimes you did it there, when you're talking, it's like, okay, I've decided what the first step's going to be, and it's like you can see people almost doing this, and it's like, okay, what is here that's stopping you from taking that step into? And I think sometimes there's a fear that sits in behind it that stops people from taking that first step. Sometimes there's a question around the emotional investment. So like, how much do you want this? Because you like with any change, the fear of the change and the unknown has to be less than the fear of staying the same and not achieving it. So it's kind of asking the questions around, how much do you want this? What's going to be different when it happens? And you talked about visualization, which can also really help with that. But sometimes it's what's the fear that's stopping you from taking that step? And then sometimes the question is, okay, can you make that step any smaller? Like, how do you make it really easy to take that first step? If that first step is still really difficult to take, can you make it any smaller? Can you almost make it seem too easy to take that you almost fall into it and just end up doing it? And I think the other side of it is the Mel Robbins kind of 5-second rule of, okay, you've decided that you're going to do it, you've made that decision, now you just need to do it. So she talks about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, do it. Stop the thinking, stop the debate that's going on in your head, but you're making that decision. You've made the decision that that's what you're going to do. You set the date and time of when that's going to happen, and when that date and time comes, you do it. And I think sometimes we have to understand, or try to understand, what it is that's holding us back. But also, sometimes it's a learned behavior. The procrastination is a learned behavior, and there may not be a reason behind it other than the fact that that's what you've always done. And it might be that at some point there was a very good reason, and it served you well. There was a purpose behind the procrastination, and your brain has registered that that's a really helpful thing to do. So that's now become a learned response. So sometimes there's a reason, there's a very legitimate reason of why you're not taking that step and why that procrastination is there. Sometimes it's just a learned behavior that's what you've learned to do. You've learned to leave it till the last minute. You've learned to kind of hold off as long as possible, or you've learned to wait until something feels different or more information comes in, or whatever that is. But if it's a learned behavior, there might not be a reason for it other than the fact that that's how I've always done it.
Yeah, and I think you
don't want to do it that way, then you've got to do something different.
I know, and James always laughs at me because, as an example, we were doing our speaking or the online workshops last year when we were doing about them. And James would be saying to me, "Oh, it's in 6 weeks' time. We'll start planning it now." Oh, it's 6 weeks away. It's fine. Like, don't worry. And James is like, "No, it's 6 weeks. Like, we need to start now. Like, you've got things on, and I've got things on, and we need to start going." And I'm like, "No, 6 weeks. It's fine." And so James would steadily work on it and be ready, really, really, and almost like we were saying, jump 2 feet in, probably within 24 hours, in the nicest possible way. Similar to my brother would be like, "Yeah, done it," and I'll be like, "Oh, well, 6 weeks away is loads of time.
Yeah.
And that's where, you were talking about your accountability group, and some people from a work perspective are very fortunate to have mentors. I have some really amazing friends that actually sometimes you can bounce things off other people sometimes, and actually and that's why I think it's so good to be surrounded by other people and to have those other people in your life, because they do make you go, yeah, all right, it is 6 weeks, but I probably do need to get it done. And it won't mean that maybe I could bring it down to like 3 weeks, but maybe by 4 I might be ready. And so, I think that's why your accountability group, your mentor, your partner, your friend, whatever it is, to have those conversations to say, this is my goal, this is what I want to do, and I'm really struggling with it actually. And sometimes, the amount of times where I've had those conversations with friends and they've gone, well, you should just do this. And I was like, oh, that's like, what? And because they know you, they're able to say, well, actually, why didn't you just do this? Because you did that before and that worked. And actually you are, you can do it. And you go, oh, that is true.
I think also it's that question, isn't it? Is it helpful for me to put this off at this point? Am I waiting for more information to come through? Are there more important things that need to be done first? Like, there's lots of sort of very sort of smart questions, if you like, that you can ask yourself to help you determine whether or not, is it good to do it now, or is it good to schedule it in for later? But it also depends on what your what your history is. If you've worked in a role where actually it's better to wait, and it's better to kind of hold off until more information comes through, or you have something more to work with, then you will have learned to respond to things in that way. I talk frequently about my police background. You couldn't wait. You had to make a decision with the information that you had. So that means that my history, so my computer brain tells me that take what information you've got, make a decision, get things started, and then when more information comes in, you can reassess and make a different decision. So that's my learned response. Now, in a police environment, that's really, really helpful. In a business environment, making decisions, it's not always helpful. So I have to ask myself the question of, is it helpful for me to jump in and get started, or would it be better for me to wait and procrastinate or delay for more information to come through? But that's purely on learned response. There's no fear there as such. It's more just that's how I'm used to working. So I think it's good to reflect and understand both of, okay, am I putting this off because I'm worried about something, or am I putting this off because that's what I've always done? And which is helpful. Yeah,
definitely understanding the why, isn't it, is really good. Really, really good. Yeah, that's all my questions. So that was all my questions.
I'd lost count. It's just really interesting conversation. And what I love doing about these is when I speak to people who do think differently, who do things differently. And I think that picks up on what you were saying about surrounding yourself with people who you can learn from and who you can grow with. But I think that the whole birds of a feather flock together is great to an extent, but where's the learning in that? There's a whole lot more learning when you surround yourself with people who are different, who think differently, who feel differently, who respond differently, because it opens up that curiosity of, well, what if I did just jump in with 2 feet? What would be different for me?
And I think
what would happen if I stopped and waited and just
and just think about things a little bit, and I don't think either way is the better way. It's just, I think it's a really, I think, as I said earlier on, with experience and just life experience, and that can come when you're in your early 20s or older. I think you learn to be able to speak to others and listen to what they say. It doesn't mean you have to take it on board. I remember one of the workshops I did with you with Brené Brown and her arena, but that's another subject. And but it's really important. I find that as a procrastinator and as someone who does then have that anxiety around it, I find that when I'm faced with something quite difficult, I will talk to the people who will jump in, because I find that then that makes me say, sometimes I'm like, I don't even know how you could even do that. Like, I really literally don't. And I can feel myself going like, I don't know what you are talking about. But what it does is it tends to bring me somewhere in the middle. So where I am, as a natural person who procrastinates and probably worries about things and wants it to work a certain way and things like that, and then you have someone like yourself or like James or like my brother or other people who jump in 2 feet. I find I come somewhere between the two. I'm not quite jumped 2 feet in, but I'm somewhere in the middle that makes me go, do you know what, actually, if you're, if as a jump 2 feet person, you're saying, oh, just get on with it, just do it. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, maybe not. But I tell you what, I will do it this far. I will go to this level. And I find personally, for me, with goal setting and things like that, I like talking my goals through with friends and family and people who mean something, and people who can give me a different perspective. Who I can say, well, this is my idea, this is what I think, what do you reckon? And being able to listen to someone who might be very different to you, take it, not necessarily take it on board, but listen and then say, okay, actually, is that relevant? Is it something? Can I take it on board? Is my God, and I find that really helpful when I'm setting goals.
I think it helps gain that clarity, doesn't it? Because you're then looking at it through somebody else's eyes. And we're creatures of habit. We think the same, we feel the same, we do the same. So being able to bounce it around with somebody who has a different perspective, it just helps us to open up that perspective a little bit wider to see, okay, what else could it be? What else what haven't I thought about? What else could I add in or take away? Or actually just gives you that clarity of what you've come up with is going to work for you and works for you. And I think, remind yourself that outside of that comfort zone is the fear zone. That's always going to be the case. But if you know the purpose and you've set that intention and you know why you're going to push through that fear zone, it makes it much easier you're focusing ahead into what you're working towards rather than focusing on the uncomfortable, that discomfort feeling of stepping out and doing something a little bit different. But I think that's, again, talking about the emotional investment and really understanding what it is that you want and why you want it. What do you want to be different? What do you want to feel different? That if that sets your focus, that's where you're heading towards, that's where your focus is, rather than on that discomfort that you're feeling as you step towards that. So sometimes you kind of have to look over the top of the zone and keep your eyes on the prize of where you're trying to get to.
Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of like that gladiator. It's the I'm showing my age now, but remember they used to have to run through the duel and they've got the big sticks.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep your eye on where it is that you're trying to get to, because you know that it will be worth whatever that feeling is that happens.
Yeah, all those getting walloped on the way.
Exactly. And I asked the same question of a client this morning. It feels uncomfortable. Does that mean automatically that that's a negative thing? We associate discomfort with negative, but actually a lot of the discomfort that we feel is also a positive. So
very true. Very, very true.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Loved the conversation, and hopefully those of you who've been watching and listening in have done too. We'll put your details in so that people can come and find you and James at Ripples Wellbeing. Fantastic organisation. Would definitely recommend. And hopefully some more collaborative work in the future, I hope, between Phoenix and Ripples. Watch this space. But thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for your sharing your thoughts and feelings on things. There's a lot of really useful information in there. So thank you very much.
No, it was a pleasure. I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for having me along.
Thank you. And we will be back with another episode very, very soon.